Good evening. Can you hear me at the back? Yeah. Great. It's a great turnout, so thank you very much for sparing your time from this evening, and thank you, Izzet, for organising it. So as Izzet said, I represent one of the wards affected by this development. So I'm not going to speak against more affordable housing, which is the Labour Party policy on this, but I'm going to speak from a perspective of a ward councillor and articulate back to you what I've heard from residents since this became public, and some real deep concerns, which many of you have already had, and that's why you're here this evening. Before this went public, as ward councillors, we weren't aware of all of the details of the development. So some of the, particularly the one in my ward, it's stated as being 6-storey high, and many residents are contacting us and saying, well, 6 stories, how's that going to impact on our quality of life, the issue of light and shading, and also why this site in the ward. If any of you know where Quince Road is on Lewisham Road, there are 3 tower blocks there, that are 4 tower blocks that are in desperate need of refurbishment and renovation. You know, they were built 40, 50 years ago, and money has been spent internally on them, but on the outside, the fabric of those buildings, it's not a place where you really want to leave in the condition as it is. So investment in those are badly needed. So on the back of that, residents were very surprised to find out that the car parking land that's used by them, and there's not enough car parking there at all, because a lot of the car parking happens all over the estate, but this specific car parking site, if it's lost, will mean lots of parking on Lewisham Road itself, which is a heavily used bus lane, and also on other parts of the site. So it's just displacing parking all over the place on that particular estate. And they're very worried about the loss of the open space and the amenity, because the car parking is at, some of it is at below ground level. And they contacted us, and some of the questions they've asked us is the questions that I posed when I spoke at the scrutiny call-in meeting to try and get some answers about what was the long list of sites. Okay, the cabinet put forward 3 sites, but where were the other 7 or 10 or 15 that were discounted, and why these 3 and not other sites, and particularly why not sites that are not part of existing housing estates? Because there's a sort of technical differentiation between housing land and land that the council owns that doesn't have housing estates on it. Anything that's on a housing estate is called HRA land, housing revenue account. And in principle, and also in ethics and ethos, it is the land that belongs to tenants. They pay for that land through their rent and service charge and everything. So the council is a guardian of that land, you could say. And as a guardian, it should put the interests of the tenants and residents first before the interests of private developers. So we asked questions at the scrutiny call-in on what assessment has been done on the deliverability of these housing units on these sites. By asking that question, we were hoping to try and find out if anyone's done some research on, you know, how high those dwellings could go, what sort of cost they would involve, you know, and how local people could benefit from it. Because we didn't want to automatically reject something that we felt might benefit local residents, particularly with 16,000 people on the housing waiting list in Greenwich, and 1,000 in temporary accommodation. So housing's a top priority. And when we became acutely aware that it was going to be land sold to a private developer, not a housing association, where sometimes you can do a partnership with them because they are part of the public sector, but to a private developer to be sold at 20% below market value, but at units that are 20% smaller than the average unit. And if any of you in this room has recently visited any new development to see what the new size units are, I'm telling you, you can't swing a couple of cats in those units. You know, if they're 1 or 2 bedrooms, they're really small. So imagine to have something 20% smaller than that. So our residents were saying, well, come on, Mehboob, how on earth are we going to, you know, live in those units? Because the ones that we've got now were built 50, 60 years ago, which are quite spacious compared to modern standards. So they're not fit for purpose that way as well. And their concerns were the things that we were saying. We're saying at the scrutiny call-in that you've got to listen very, very carefully to what the tenants and leaseholders have to say, because they're already extremely concerned about what they've read, what they've heard from each other, and they're worried that their housing estates are going to be, in many ways, in their views, blighted by these developments. They all want more housing because they live in overcrowded accommodation, or they've got children who can't afford to buy and live on those estates. And the vast majority of them have told ward councillors, not just in Greenwich West, but in the other affected 3 wards, is that the type of housing they want are the ones that are on a social rent. And ideally, if it's housing land, it should be used for building new council houses for housing council tenants. And you know, you gave me a small applause for that, and because it's what this country needs, and it's what this borough needs as well. Because councils haven't been able to build because of all sorts of restrictions by central government, you know, more social housing units. We are, as a council, building, but you know, it's slow, and it's going to take a long time just to build, you know, a couple of 100 units. When you've got 16,000 people on the council housing waiting list, you know, it's not even a drop in the ocean. And they've said to us that, you know, if there's going to be a consultation, we want to be able to put forward some views, some options, not just say yes or no to what's being put forward. Because if the council works with tenants, we can help you across the borough look for alternative solutions. And if it's going to be genuinely committed to the future needs of people who live in this borough, people on low incomes, people who are out working, you know, 40, 50, 60 hours a week, but just about managing to make ends meet, it can't be housing to buy, because they won't be eligible for mortgages, they won't be able to get the 20% deposit, because these are still going to sell for, you know, in excess of £300,000, as they have done in other boroughs in London. So it's still that 20% at £60,000 that they need to put down for the mortgage deposit is still way out of their reach. And I'm hoping that during the consultation that those tenants' voices are heard loud and clear, in that more social housing for rent is needed. We will work with you to look for alternative sites, but we will also want in return back that this money from wherever the council sells land across the borough, it's got to be invested in more council housing, and that's got to come very, very quickly as well. So it's got to be about building those at pace. And there's one element in the council report, because, you know, decisions aren't made in public meetings like this, they're made in the council chamber by the cabinet, who have already published a document which you could all read on the council's website. And at 1.7, I'm sorry to be technical on this, it explains what happens after the consultation. It says that, and this is a sort of almost word for word repeating of that, it says that the outcome of the consultation will be reported by a council officer to the cabinet member. The council officer will make the decision in consultation with the cabinet member. Now, to me, you elect councillors to make decisions on your behalf. You know, officers do the work for us, give us the technical advice, but the council's cabinet, of which I'm not a member, are the ones who tenants and residents have said should make the decision and should make it in public, so that people can see what the deliberations are, and also a further opportunity to raise their concerns if they're not happy with the outcome of the consultation process. And it left us with an impression, when we read that at that scrutiny call-in, that there was an element of bias in favour of moving ahead quickly with this decision and not going back through a proper, transparent, more open governance process. And the other issue that we raised, which is a contentious one, but one that Jeremy Corbyn strongly believes in, and I know this isn't political, and I'm not using it as a political angle, but he says that tenants should have a binding ballot when there's significant changes to the estate that they live in. In some places in the country, it's about knocking down and rebuilding, and tenants having the guarantee to return back to their homes on the same terms and conditions and the same rent. In some estates, like these three, it is going to be some significant changes, and changes that tenants need to buy into if they are going to be supported. So I, along with other ward councillors who were at that scrutiny call-in, and those who are here this evening, strongly believe that there should be a ballot of tenants on the estate, and they should be given the impartial facts by an organisation that's looked at all of the financials and the details that we all need to have, such as the value of those properties, the size of them, how many units are going to be one bedroom, how many are family units, and also there's the big guarantee that residents are asking. So say, for example, that if they could afford to buy, then what guarantee is it that the next purchaser of those properties will also be able to buy them at 20% below market value, or not be inflated back to full market value, and the first purchaser then makes a 20% profit markup. So there's a lot of issues that are currently remain unanswered, and I know that you're very anxious to try and find out as much information as you can this evening. I'm going to hang around for as long as I can. My other two ward colleagues from Greenwich West are unable to make it this evening. They've got other prior commitments, which if they left, it would have meant some other residents in Greenwich West having a meeting tonight without a councillor present, so we shared out duties. But when, like Izzat said, we do break up into small working groups, I will try my best to take away your questions and your contact details and try and get answers to the questions if I can't answer them this evening. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you once again very much for coming this evening. Oh yes, after David speaks, I'm happy to answer any.